Alice Paul, taking a stand for women's equality. Alice Paul fought 67 years for women's rights and took a stand against society's normal to pass the 19th Amendment and write the Equal Rights Amendment. Thanks to Alice Paul, women now have the right to vote and are now treated much more equal. Though there is still some work to be done, we are so advanced in the women's suffrage movement because of Alice Paul's determination, bravery, and courage.
She took a stand by not letting her issues be sidelined, specifically getting women the right to vote. At one point, it was very easy, particularly for legislators and the president, to kind of ignore the women's suffrage issue. It was something that they didn't really have to address. Alice Paul made sure that they were confronted with the issue and that, she really forced them to make a statement for or against women's suffrage.
Alice Stokes Paul was born into a Quaker community where she was raised believing that all were equal in God's eyes. Her whole surrounding community treated all men and women equally, and she knew that was how it was to be done. Paul also attended suffrage meetings with her mother, often as a child, which gave her a look into suffrage, but Paul didn't always plan to be a women's rights suffragist. She attended school at Swarthmore College and the University of Pennsylvania, and went on to do graduate work in New York and England.
But yes, Alice Paul's extensive education was probably unusual for a woman at the time. She went and earned 6 degrees over the course of her education, including 2 bachelor's, 2 master's, and 2 doctorates.
She traveled to England in 1907 on a scholarship to study social work. In London, she met the Pankhursts, Emmeline, and her 2 daughters, Christabel and Sylvia.
She was a student taking classes at the University of Birmingham, and there was a suffrage speech given by Christabel Pankhurst, and the audience, it was a lot of students, were so upset with the topic of women's suffrage that they actually attacked her. They threw things at her. And Alice Paul was kind of curious about what had people so angry about the topic of women's suffrage that they would actually boo and force her off stage. It's a couple months later, though. She's a social worker, and she has a friend that says, hey, you should be part of this parade that we're getting ready to do for women's suffrage. And that's really the point where she becomes active with the movement.
She began to work with women's suffrage in England and learned and participated in militant tactics, including hunger strikes, imprisonments, and undergoing force feeding. While being a part of this in England, she learned that her true passion didn't lie in social work. It was in women's suffrage. Upon returning to the States in 1910, Paul was determined to make a change. She enrolled again at the University of Pennsylvania and received a PhD in sociology, and in 1912, she launched her full-time suffrage career. She first worked within the National American Woman Suffrage Association, and for her first major project, she organized a huge suffrage parade scheduled on Woodrow Wilson's inauguration day to bring attention to their cause.
I think that the parade was even bigger than anybody had planned for it to be, maybe including Alice Paul. I think there were a lot of suffragists who said, is this going to be 100 people there? Is it going to be 1,000 people? And then, a lot of historians say there were about 8,000 women and men who eventually did join the parade. So I think that Alice Paul always planned big, but nobody really knew who was going to be there until the day of.
Carrie Chapman Catt, a main leader of the National American Woman Suffrage Association, found her tactics too aggressive and worried it would set them back. Upon leaving, Paul brought together a group of women who were willing to break apart from the group's conservative acts. Lucy Burns was a part of this group of women, and her and Paul worked closely together for many years. The group of women broke away from the organization in 1914 and formed the Congressional Union, later renamed the National Woman's Party. Paul led pickets at the White House and against Congress.
Well, I think it was a general situation of not being able to go to any more delegations to him that he announced.
Yeah.
And I don't know when he announced it, but somewhere around that period, I always supposed it was because he was getting so involved in it was a very great thought of war, and we might get in it. And seemed very natural. So we had quite a long discussion, I guess many days and weeks maybe, before we decided to start in picket, because when you start you have to be prepared to carry it through for a long time or it's ineffective.
World War I had also begun around this time, but the suffragists refused to abandon their protests, which caused the general public to be furious with them.
Early suffrage sentiment was definitely divided. I think that there was opposition. I think there was a lot of opposition from men or from a male perspective. But there were also people like women who were against women's suffrage. And I think that some of the ideas, and you see this in a lot of political cartooning, that if women won the right to vote, it would really turn around social roles. And then, a lot of people thought that if women got the right to vote, suddenly they would want more. They would want to step outside of the home more. They wouldn't want to stay home and take care of kids. They would want to go into jobs. So there's a lot of concern about what women's roles are going to be if they start to become more involved with what's happening politically and what's happening publicly beyond the home.
Paul was eventually arrested and imprisoned for picketing and being a part of the Silent Sentinels. The Silent Sentinels were a group of suffragettes who had the name given to them due to their relentless silent protesting in front of the White House. Paul began her time in the district jail for 3 days and was soon transferred to Occoquan prison. No matter if they were sent to Occoquan or the district jail, they received no light treatment despite only being political prisoners. Paul went on hunger strikes against the prison's poor sanitation and insufficient food and was eventually sent to the prison psychiatric ward. There, she was force-fed raw eggs through feeding tubes. In an interview with American Heritage, Paul said, "It was shocking that a government of men could look with such extreme contempt on a movement that was asking nothing except such a simple little thing as the right to vote." In November 1917, an event called Night of Terror took place. Arrests had stopped for a few months, but when they began again, the superintendent of Occoquan and the prison guards greeted them with brutal beatings and torture, mostly women a part of the National Women's Party. The women were soon moved to the district jail, and despite her colleagues experiencing this traumatic event, Paul remained intrepid, and the women were released on November 27th and 28th. They continued to fight, and the 19th Amendment was eventually passed by Congress on June 4th, 1919. The amendment was ratified on August 18th, 1920. After the suffrage amendment was ratified, Paul quickly set to work on writing the Equal Rights Amendment, also known as the ERA. She went back to school and earned 3 law degrees from American University and Washington College. She believed that these degrees would help her be better equipped to write the ERA.
The amendment that I proposed, and I said this is just a tentative proposal because we've asked a good many lawyers to work on a form and so on, and the wording doesn't make much difference if we agree on what we want. So I presented this: men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States and every place subject to its jurisdiction. Because that said it all. And I said, that's what we want, let's say what we want. And if they can find, that's when I started to study law, because I thought, I can't do anything without knowing as much as the people who will be our opponents. I don't know anything whatsoever about law. So I then went down at night. I went up and lived at the headquarters, and I don't mean night, every early morning about 6 o'clock, and went to the American University and enrolled in the law department. And I got my bachelor's degree in law.
She proposed the ERA in 1923 and lived to see it pass in 1972 and sent for ratification, yet she never saw the amendment ratified. 15 states still have yet to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment: Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Nevada, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Utah, and Virginia. Alice Paul continued to work out of D.C. until her health physically forced her to take a rest and back away. She resided to Morristown, New Jersey, where she was born and spent her childhood growing up. Even after moving back to her childhood town, she worked hard and inspired women across the nation and encouraged them to keep fighting. Paul passed away in 1977 at the age of 92 after living a full life. She continues to be an inspiration for women and men alike around the world.